Hello, so welcome today to our third video in the series exploring the funding options available to female-led business. Today I'm joined by Julia Rabin, who is the project lead for Diversity VC, and also by Claire Palmer, who is part of the emerging venture capital practice at Silicon Valley Bank. Venture capital is a key source of funding for early stage businesses. And as a result, we're interested today to explore how the makeup of these firms might influence the ways in which they invest. So Julia, would you be able to provide an overview of what Diversity VC is and the key findings of your report last year?
Diversity VC are a not-for-profit group, and we're on a mission to build a fairer, more representative VC industry. We were launched in 2017. Most of our work up till now has been research on the demographics of the industry today, because a lot of this data just didn't exist before now. We've published a number of reports, all of which can be found online. The most recently was Silicon Valley Bank's one last year, in which we found that of the current VC workforce, 30% are female. Most of these individuals are working in more junior positions or not on the investment team. 76% are white. That's compared to 59% of the working population in London, which it's worth considering with all these statistics is where most of these VCs are based. 1 in 5 will have gone to Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford or Harvard and or have a degree from a business school. And for an industry where we're investing in the companies of tomorrow, it's quite interesting that only 8% of us have actually worked in a startup before.
So Claire, what was it that made Silicon Valley Bank want to sponsor the report?
So diversity and inclusion is one of Silicon Valley Bank's core values. And the reason why we sponsored the Diversity VC report is to very much try and tackle this issue head on and enable change. And don't get me wrong, we have seen some positive changes, which will hopefully come through in the long run. But there's actually so much more that needs to be done now. For us, it's critical that VCs truly embrace diversity of thought, and they do this by building teams around them who vary in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, career and educational backgrounds. And this is particularly important at partnership level because it means not only will they bring people in and look at them with diverse eyes and an open mindset into the firm itself, but it will feed into their investment thesis. It's all interconnected.
So I'm really interested in how the report talked also about the career and the educational backgrounds, as well as just the more traditional demographics. And what impact do you think this has on the ways in which individuals invest?
It has a huge impact. So it's not new news that diverse teams perform better. And we at Silicon Valley Bank strongly believe that diversity builds stronger teams and enables better investment decisions. I think that there has been a huge focus on gender and ethnicity. And don't get me wrong, this is still a huge issue in the industry, and a lot needs to be done to get this. We need to see more women and ethnic minorities in senior positions within VCs. Diversity has multiple parameters, right? So actually looking at education and career, they're still hugely influential in shaping our behavior and how we make decisions. European VCs largely have similar backgrounds, similar education and career experiences. And this is coupled with the fact that a venture capitalist is more likely to make an investment into a company that has come through a warm introduction. And this is typically people in their network who are like them.
It's probably worth mentioning at this point that from a small fund's point of view, they don't have an HR person normally. They don't have the resources to go through a really formal hiring process. It is usually much easier to go through their own networks or to go through a recruiter who will themselves just hire from the same networks. So we can see how this whole lack of diversity does form, but just because we can understand how that happens, that doesn't mean that funds don't need to go out of their way to reach out to other more diverse networks, because this added layer of homogeneity in the industry does really affect who they invest in. Claire mentioned that VCs tend to invest in people who are similar to themselves, who they know come from the same background and who think and work in the same way that they do. And it can't be denied that if you come from a VC's network, you will find it easier to get through those initial first few meetings. All of this is feeding back into this industry where founders and investors alike are all coming from the same background, and it's just not representative of the world that they're trying to create products for. To bring this back to gender as well, we don't really have evidence for this, but just from speaking to people, it does often feel like men are more likely to ask for those connections to their networks. So as a woman, that automatically puts you at a disadvantage if you're not going to work in a way that this industry just operates on. If you're a woman who doesn't come from the same background and career or education as the people who are giving the money, that just puts you at a further disadvantage yet again.
I also think it's critical that the industry changes what they view a good founder to be. So typically they'll look at a candidate, and if they see that they're ex-Facebook or ex-Harvard or Stanford, that's a really good filter to get them to that next level as to whether they'd consider investing in that company. And don't get me wrong, of course, that can help with finding candidates who have high IQ and good talent. But actually, there are lots of other data points that come into play as well. So you could look at the founders' risk, whether they have the right risk appetite, their sense of perseverance, their ability to build a team, and their general, founder behaviours. And I think that gets overlooked if you just look at someone's career and education background. So even though we are seeing VCs building teams who are more balanced in terms of gender, ethnicity, they are still coming from similar educational backgrounds. So like I said before, ex-Harvard or Stanford, ex-consulting, or come from one of the big banks. And so the question really becomes like, how do you go about building a more diverse team?
And this is another thing that Diversity VC are really focused on now. So as well as the report last year, we also published a toolkit which VCs can use to help them build more diverse teams and also more diverse portfolios, going into, as the two are interconnected, as we've discussed. When it comes to a team, we talk about reaching out to more diverse communities when you're hiring for a role, and also just really basic things like how to write a job description that appeals to more than one demographic, because I think that's something that VCs and startup founders themselves will often not take into account. We also really encourage VCs to take on interns. Interns are a really great way to reach out to individuals from new networks and get them into your own, especially if you take them on while they're still at university. You can then follow them, keep in touch with them throughout the years. It was for this reason that we launched Future VC last year, which is an internship program that takes individuals from the least represented backgrounds in VC and places them in 8-week paid internships across the UK.
And then you also have Notions Included.
Which is another great program.
Yeah, it's an amazing program, which is all about getting people from underprivileged backgrounds into the industry. So they join at either an associate or an analyst level. And back to Julia's point on diversity in pipeline, we are seeing more firms broadening their network and also partnering with firms like Ada Ventures, Backstage Capital, and Astia, who naturally have a much more diverse network of entrepreneurs.
So I know we've talked a lot about diversity of VC firms. I'm interested now as well in the lens around inclusion. And have you seen VC firms that you would say have an inclusive culture? And if so, what would you say help them to foster this?
Yeah, so a lot of our clients, I think, have built very inclusive cultures. I do think that diversity helps. So having a diverse management team or partnership, and having people who are genuinely passionate about inclusivity and are aware of the issues of the lack of diversity within the industry. So you need the people at the top to feed this down, so it cascades down to the wider team and encourages them to embrace it as well. When it comes to good examples, I think Atomico are a really good firm to look at. I know that they recently changed their parental leave policies to make it equal to all, and they also have hiring policies in place. So when working with recruiters, they won't accept candidate lists which are less than 50% female. And I also know they don't offer internships to family and friends. And then if you look at a smaller firm that's done really well, Kindred are great. And I think it really helps that they have a partnership that comes from 4 different nationalities. They vary in terms of age, gender, their socioeconomic backgrounds, their sector exposure. But they've also they've also extended their parental leave policy. They promote flexible working, and they also, which I think was really interesting, as well as coaching their founders for a year once they've invested in them, they also have coaching for people within inside the firm. So it really allows people to embrace diverse perspectives, but they're all cohesive and they've all got one goal.
And just to disagree with some of what you said there slightly, I think it's very true that you do need to get people at the top of the business to buy into diversity and inclusion, but you don't need to be a diverse team to develop a diverse and inclusive culture. So you look at some funds who have less visibly diverse board members and partners, and they are absolutely killing it when it comes to inclusion. So we've mentioned maternity leave, we've mentioned hiring policies, we've mentioned how they go out to actually look for new employees, and also how this feeds into the demographics of who they make sure they look at in their pipeline. I think it's really important to acknowledge the work that is done by these funds, because sometimes the conversation around diversity and inclusion can feel quite exclusive, paradoxically, to certain people, and that absolutely shouldn't be the case, because it's going to take everyone in the industry working together to build a truly diverse industry overall. And I think picking up on what you were saying about Kindred actually providing support and coaching to their founders picks up on another big point that Diversity VC are quite keen to promote, is funds should help their portfolio companies to themselves build diverse and inclusive cultures. So going back to what you were saying about Kindred providing support and coaching to their founders, this plays into a really important point that we make at Diversity VC, is that funds, once you've built a diverse and inclusive team of your own, really ought to encourage their portfolio companies to themselves build diverse and inclusive teams, not just regarding how diverse the founders are, but right down through the whole of the startup, as they're going to grow and get bigger, and they need to nail inclusivity from the beginning. Furthermore, diverse portfolios will then encourage more diverse talent, and also just looking at where a lot of founders will have worked before. Lots of founders will previously have some work experience at a startup. So if the startups we invest in today are building a diverse and inclusive culture themselves, then that's creating this whole new pool of new diverse talent that might go ahead and strike out on their own in the future. This in turn will hopefully in the long run lead to this overall much more diverse and inclusive and representative industry across the board.
Yeah, and let's not forget that there is a much wider issue here. I think one of the biggest enablers is education, and until everyone has equal opportunities and equal access to this, we're really going to struggle to find the diversity that we strive for.
I think that's absolutely true. And again, going back to that point about how 1 in 5 investors will have gone to the 4 universities, if you just look at the demographics of those universities, that also feeds into the socioeconomic background of the industries that they go and work in. So taking Oxford and Cambridge, for example, private school students are massively overrepresented at these institutions. They then go and work in industries which will again have privately educated individuals massively overrepresented there too. So we know from the news, and it's been in public conversation for a while, there is a responsibility on the universities to work on creating more diversity within their student body. We as an industry also need to take responsibility of our own and reach out to other networks and just wider pools of talent beyond these traditional feeder institutions.
So that's been a really interesting discussion today. So thank you very much, Julia and Claire, for joining me. And thank you to everybody who's watched. If you are interested in this topic, please do take time to look at the other videos in our series.